Okay. There's Jim's. Hey. Hey, Luis. How are you? Luis. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and call the Fort Ord Reuse Authority regular meeting for Friday, November 17th, 2017 to order. Welcome, everyone. And let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If Supervisor Alejo will lead us. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to say welcome to Supervisor Alejo. It's good to have you here. The next item on the agenda is acknowledgments, announcements, and correspondence. Mr. Hulamard.
Right, just a couple of announcements about some upcoming events. First, the Fort Ord Reuse Authority will be conducting a community workshop, Eastside Parkway Project Goals and Objectives. That'll be held on December the 6th. It'll be at 2 different times, and we'll be announcing the specific times, sort of a late afternoon time and then an early evening time, and it'll be put on the FORA website in the coming week. December 13th, just an important item, there's going to be a special Wreaths Across America wreath laying event that's going to be at the California Central Coast Veteran Cemetery. That'll be at 9 a.m. on December 13th. And then finally, just a quick note, many of you this morning joined in the rollout for the Monterey Bay Defense Alliance, an effort that's underway to continue to strengthen and support our military installations in the Monterey Bay region, including those that remain on the former Fort Ord. Chair, that's the end of my announcements.
Okay, the next item is closed session. If legal counsel will read us in.
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the board and public. Item 4A, conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9D2, one matter of significant exposure to litigation. The claimant is Monterey Community Partners.
Very good. Okay, would you like to read us out of closed session, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the board and public. The board met in closed session on item 4A, conference with legal counsel, Government Section 54956.9D2, one matter of significant exposure to litigation, where the claimant is Marina Community Partners. The board heard from counsel on the status of that matter, and there's nothing to report out at this time.
Okay, thank you. The next item is a roll call, please.
Supervisor Parker. Here. Supervisor Phillips. Supervisor Luis Alejo. Walking in.
He's here. He's walking in.
Mayor Edelin. Here. Councilmember O'Connell. Here. Councilmember Morton. Here. Vice Mayor Hoffa. Here. Oh, okay. Councilmember Hoffa. Thank you. Mayor Rubio.
Here.
Councilmember Alexander. Here. Mayor Carbone. Here. Mayor Gunter.
Here.
Councilmember Garfield.
Here.
Councilmember Reimers.
Here.
Manny Jimenez. Nicole Hollingsworth. Erica Parker. Todd Muck. Dr. Diffenbaugh. Steve Matarazzo. Dr. Ochoa. Hugh Harden. Bill Collins. Dr. Tridley, Michelle Overmeyer, Dr. Moore. You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the consent agenda, which consists of approve the October 13, 2017 meeting minutes, approve the October 26 special meeting minutes, Administrative Committee, Veterans Issues Advisory Committee, 2018 Board of Directors meeting calendar, public correspondence to the board, and the prevailing wage status report. Is there any item that anyone would like to pull for further consideration?
Mr. Chair, I would like to pull item G for question.
All right. Is there anybody in the public that would like to pull anything for further consideration? That's G. That's correct. Okay, that is being pulled for further consideration. Is there any public comment on the consent agenda? Seeing none. The motion and the second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Hulamard, item G. Was there, let's start this way. Mr. Hoppe, is there a particular question you had?
Yeah, so I guess I was surprised to learn in the staff report that the DIR had issued fines in excess of $900,000 for failure for various contractors to comply with prevailing wage. And that is a concern to me. That means we have people who are working, doing, hard work, important work, and not being paid what they're owed. But I noticed in the staff report, there's a various kind of protocol and planning checklist. To me, that looks really positive that we're providing the jurisdictions and the contractors with kind of a planning list so that they know what they should be doing. But my question is, could FORA also request some sort of, regular report from the jurisdictions regarding compliance with this?
I do know that Sherry Damon and Robert Norris are in fairly regular communication with the jurisdiction. Sherry, would you like to make a note on this?
Good afternoon, Board. Sherry Damon. Yes, so when I prepare this prevailing wage status report for your consideration, I am reaching out to all the jurisdictions and the developers on the base to help compile this information. So it's not a formal report from the jurisdictions, but everybody receives a request from me, and I compile all that information as part of this report.
But could FORA make a kind of formal request on, a 6-month basis or an annual basis or something like that? Because obviously we've had a problem, and I think that FORA has the authority to exercise, to exercise some supervision of this because it is part of the base reuse plan.
I think that's up to the board to direct me if that's what this board wants to do and have me explore more fully. I suspect that's something that we could follow up on.
So then if that is something that is within the authority of the board, I would ask that we agendize that for future discussion.
We will do that. I'll ask Robert Norris. Do you want to add anything, Robert? But would you bring a report back next month?
Most certainly. I think in the last direction from the board was to assist the jurisdictions, and we are, asking for their voluntary submission of information, and moving from that point on, we've invited the Department of Industrial Relations down twice. We're looking for follow-up and interpretation of the new legislation in this area, so we can agendize it and give you a full report in the future.
Okay. Yes.
With that Department of
Industrial
Relations, there was some new legislation. I believe we both attended a conference on that. So
yes.
There's some new permitting
Yes.
that they need to provide, and so would that be FORA looking at that?
We've already invited them to come and to provide training and reports. We had a session right in this room. It was not everything we hoped it would be. We've asked them to send someone more senior to provide even more detail and to provide something more. We will continue to do that work with both Senator Mining's office and Assemblymember Stone's office as well to get that assistance. They've been very effective in the past getting the Department of Industrial Relations to respond. The jurisdictions in our past efforts to do this, the workshop we had about a year or so ago was very well attended, and they brought higher ranking people. We'd like them to do that again. So if we can get more active and regular participation by the jurisdictions, more active involvement from the Department of Industrial Relations, and participation by the development community and others, we can be more effective at making sure that prevailing wage gets effectively treated here at Fort Ord. We've had some problems in part because many at least indicate that they don't know all of the requirements, all of the reporting, the new apprenticeship requirements. This is the second time the DIR has changed the state law in the last 3 years. And so that creates confusion in and of itself. So what we'd like to do is get everybody up to speed, everybody providing their prevailing wage work in a comparable way, as this board's policies have always been that prevailing wage needs to be equally enforced across the base. That's what our attempt is. We don't have all the authority we'd like to have in that regard to enforce the policy, but in working with the jurisdictions and the DIR together, we should be able to do FORA's policy.
Thank you.
May I ask a follow-up of Mr. Hoffa, I guess? So the point of the reporting, Marina, when we have a public works project on former Fort Ord or anywhere, we're required to pay prevailing wage. And for us to do reporting to FORA, we would be reporting on a marina city project that is being performed on the Fort Ord property. And so placing a burden on us to do that may very well be fair and equitable among all jurisdictions. But I do want to point out that these assessments identified in the staff report are against contractors. They're not against a public agency. So just if you look at Spring Hill Suites, City of Marina sold the property to the Dunes, Monterey Marina Community Partners. Marina Community Partners sold the land to someone to develop a hotel, and the hotel developed. So the City of Marina doesn't have, other than in our contractual arrangements in the sale, we have no control over who gets paid what if prevailing wage is happening on that job. It is 3 steps removed from us. So if you're asking us to go collect information on contracts in that regard, that is an onerous burden that you're asking to place on each jurisdiction. And we would, in the City of Marina, I'm sure, be adamantly against that. So in looking at this from a staff standpoint, before you spend an exorbitant amount of staff resources, I really am trying to find out what are we trying to secure.
I don't think I want to get into in-depth discussion now because this isn't agendized, but I would say that my understanding is the jurisdictions do have police authority responsibility to enforce prevailing wage on projects within their jurisdiction, but that's my understanding, and I could be wrong.
Okay, go ahead and open this to the public. I'm sure there's at least one person who wants to comment on this.
Ron Cheshire with the Monterey Santa Cruz Building Construction Trades Council. I've expressed concerns in the past, and I have concerns now. Your compliance staffer is only as good as the information she receives, okay? There were about 155,000 hours reported, and there were approximately 2,278 workers reported. Over a 3-month period of time, which is 67 or so hours per individual for 3 months, that's 22 hours a month. It's not working, folks. I told you before, the information you're getting from a lot of the different agencies, these people don't deal with this information every day. You have a lot of redundancy. When you have prevailing wage reports come in, you can have several reports on one individual. But if they're counted 15 times, then it skews the information that you're getting. And as I told Michael before he left to go to closed session, I am offering this body assistance in coming up with at least the correct information in regards to the information you are getting, because some of the information you are not getting. Okay, that's one issue. The other issue is, yes, violations continue to occur. On behalf of the Building Trades Council, I went ahead and filed 10 liens for 10 workers on the Spring Hill Suites project. Only 10 workers. They received $140,000 in restitution. We've seen the list of subcontractors, and all I can say is, even personally, I wish those were the only violations that were on that job, but it's not. And I only have 3 minutes, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to write you a letter. And we've had issue after issue as to what your authority is here. And I'm not going to argue 1.02 of the master resolution. I'm going to argue Jerry Bowden's opinion that says you can only enforce through consistency or contract. And you're all into contracts with all of the development that goes on out there, but yet not one lawsuit's been filed in regards to all of the theft that is occurring out there. So everybody have a happy Thanksgiving. We'd like to see Building Trades holiday luncheon on December the 11th. If it's not raining, I'll barbecue. If it is raining, I'll cook at home and bring it. So thank you very much, and we'll see you later.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Yvonne Stone, County Commissioner, Executive Director of the Fort Ord Environmental Justice Network, a community-based organization that is a watchdog group for the processes that we are talking about right now. Prevailing wage, we've been talking about that since the closure of this base, and it has not been instituted yet. Not only with the building trade, which does not encompass most of the local community, but the jobs, period. We have been losing our local community by the hundreds, and nobody cares. We are willing to work with this board and have been willing to work with this board since it started back in 1994 with information on how we can do what we need to do, especially for our local community. I'm talking to a woman right now with 2 children. She's handicapped. Her daughter is handicapped, 5 years old and 11 years old. She's being put out of her place of living at Fort Ord, and she said that the only place she could find was $1,300 a month, and they told her they couldn't even rent to her unless she was making 3 times the rent of that apartment. And she's crying, and she asked me to pray for her, and I did. I called Congressman Panetta's office, and I'm going to talk to anybody that has been elected to office that needs to be looking at what is happening to our people. If they don't have the empathy to work with our community and they're getting paid to do this work to help the people who live here, and everybody now, if you don't go and work with the marijuana and help to harvest marijuana, you don't have a job. We're talking about people that have been on drugs, that is trying to get off drugs, and how we're going to help them to sustain themselves, but yet and still we're growing drugs, and people, okay, if they can work in harvesting that, or they can buy it, sell it, use it, and of course it's going to open more doors to our prison system. And what are we doing here? This is a community of people. This is the United States of America. We have to do the work that needs to be done. So I'm telling you again, we will help to survey the community of whatever needs to be done. But we are here, and we know the community, and we need you to work with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, I'll bring it back. This was a report, so there's no action other than to receive. So the motion is second to receive the report. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item is business item A, UC Monterey Bay Education Science and Technology Center status.
Yes, Chair, members of the board, I'm reprising for Josh Metz today. The University of California Monterey Bay Education Science and Technology program has been at the forefront of what we've been doing at Fort Ord for some years. It has not achieved all of its promise, but has had several accomplishments. Dr. If you're ready, there's a PowerPoint presentation. Dr. Brandt is not able to join us today, but he will be replaced ably by Muhammad Absalom, who has been working with us on an every other week basis for the last 6 months. Dr. Absalom.
Thank you very much. Year and a half, actually.
Year and a half, all right.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here today to present to you the progress update on the MBEST planning project on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, Scott Brandt. My name is Mohammed Abu Salam. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Research, and I'm responsible for industry alliances and technology commercialization. I'm going to have to go back and flip the slide because there's no clicker. So, the University of California at Santa Cruz, we support the creation and growth of startup companies emerging from the university research to remain and grow here in the region. We continue to support economic development efforts in the region through various local programs and initiatives, including the Monterey Bay Economic Partnership and other initiatives across the region. We have actually established an incubator and an accelerator in Santa Cruz, which we believe will be more accessible to startups from this region than similar programs in Silicon Valley. We support up-and-coming companies with an expanded focus beyond science and engineering. We support arts, humanities, and social enterprises. UCSC also continues to support the environment. We have dedicated 600 acres to habitat reserve. In regards to the marketing cooperation with FORA and the county, based on the June 2016 Memorandum of Agreement, we continue to cooperate and communicate with FORA and the county around our mutual interests in developing our land for research and development and economic growth for the region. We have regularly scheduled meetings and productive discussions, resulting in effective actioning of several items on a regular basis. There has been continuing interest in the development at the UC MBEST Center R&D Park on the Central North Campus. The FORA Economic Development Manager and the County Director of Economic Development maintain continuing communication with UC MBEST regarding prospective commercial tenants and buyers. There is no active prospect at this point, but for example, recently we supported an opportunity with an international cosmetic company interested in the property, but unfortunately the opportunity ended up not going through. At this time, companies are waiting for final entitlement approvals, which will be for the specific plan and subdivision map. The subdivision master plan was adopted by the Regents of the University of California several years ago, which laid out the parcels with a planning process behind it in coordination with the City of Marina to accommodate a range of light industrial and research and development activities. The draft joint specific plan was reviewed by Marina Planning Commission and City Council in the spring, and the consensus was to proceed with the environmental review and final approval. The plan is expanding the R&D land use in Central Campus to also include light industrial. This expansion of the land use designation will make the property much more marketable for projects with increased job creation potential. The City of Marina has approved final funding for the environmental review of the joint specific plan with UC MBEST, And at this time, our staff and the City of Marina planning staff are actively engaging on subdivision planning details, cost-sharing agreement, and schedule. In regards to the marketing of our lands, consistent with the visioning process and with the approach described at previous board meetings, UCSC will be issuing a bid package for the West Campus early in 2018. We will also possibly issue a package for some of the East Campus later in the year. We plan to pursue two types of transactions. One of them is opportunity-based, and these are identified through our work with FORA and the county and independent inquiries, but also Stall Act auctions, and these will be for parcels that have no specific use identified, but when the market conditions indicate that there is a good possibility that those parcels would be of interest for job-generating development. The West Campus on Imogen Road will go on the market soon for sale to developers for research and development and light industrial uses. The City of Marina has approved lot line adjustments and a roadway dedication on the West Campus, which should make the land more marketable. As a matter of fact, we understand that there may be some interest in part of the West Campus by manufactured affordable home developers. As to the East Campus, which is also known as the Blanco Triangle, from our marketing work with the County of Monterey, we understand that the county is considering undertaking planning for future uses of the East Campus where job creation is the key component. And we know that the county general plan highlights the East Campus as an opportunity property for both economic development and housing purposes. It is a very large piece of land, and we anticipate it could accommodate both goals. By the way, if you didn't know this already, you would be pleased to learn that the County Economic Development Office submitted this site for the Amazon headquarters bid. At UCSC, we do not have cannabinoid research expertise on our Santa Cruz campus, but our sister campus in San Diego has been a leader in this area through their CMCR, the Center for Medical Cannabis Research, for the past 20 years. The primary objective of the center is to conduct and support focused, controlled clinical trials on the efficacy of cannabis on patients diagnosed with HIV, AIDS, cancer, seizures, or muscle spasms, or any other similarly serious conditions. The East Campus offers an opportunity for a research industry collaboration that would advance medical research, support new businesses, and create jobs for the region. So we are in early discussions with UC San Diego to explore the possibility of establishing a cannabinoid production and research center for medical purposes. UC San Diego is very interested in this potential opportunity, and we are working with them and with our Office of the President, as well as speaking with large and small pharmaceutical companies to explore the viability of this project. Lastly, I'd like to confirm that we continue to participate in the Habitat Conservation Plan. We continue to work with FORA to finalize the base-wide plan, and we understand from FORA that the plan is on track. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions? Mr. Hoffa.
On the UCSD Center on Medical Cannabis Research, what kind of a timeline are you expecting as far as development of that concept, and when do you expect, if UCSD is ultimately interested, when do you expect that you would be bringing that that project forward?
We are very early in the conversation about that with the different parties, so I would say not before the new year that we would have a plan or a schedule for that.
Okay, and then I have one follow-up question for staff, which is, I'm glad to hear about this proposal. I think it has a lot of promise, but I've been here now for, I think, maybe 3 or 4 years. We hear these reports. We don't see a lot of progress in terms of actual job-producing enterprises at UCMBS, and I'm wondering, at some point, could FORA consider putting some sort of timeline expectations forward for project development.
Well, I think when the board decided to enter into the agreement a couple of years ago and to form a regular exchange between the university, the county, at that particular time, it wound up just being three-party agreement, but the city of Marina is involved in this on a regular basis. It really should have been a four-party agreement because the center of UC Best is in the city of Marina, and they're actively engaged in talking with UC Best all the time. But to be a little more descriptive on this one, connections between UC Best and a lot of private developers has some bureaucratic barriers to it. The kind of development that Mohammed is talking about with UCSD and a campus networked effort, that's a UC-controlled effort that actually has a much easier time moving through the process in the university than something else. And so what we've been pushing for are things like Mohammed is talking about, auctioning property that might not be used in the near term, but are clearly opportunities for the county and others. The opportunities with other campuses by using UC land for UC research-related purposes streamlines the process better that we didn't have before. And then in other areas where UC controls the land, working with the city of Marina to get those properties properly designated for private use through the specific plan and the work that they're doing with the city of Marina. So those three strategies, I'll call them, Mohammed reported on, they're working in three different ways. That has sped things up quite a bit. Now, you would say that's 18 months down the line since Mohammed's been involved and 2 years since we started that agreement. But the economic development per se, that kind of effort requires a lot of spade work, a lot of connections. The city of Salinas, Andy Myrick's been doing work for years. Some of those kind of things that he started 4 years ago are now coming to fruition today. So I'm hoping that we have the same kind of production out of this working relationship we've established with UC Best. It certainly hasn't been what we wanted in the past. Putting a timeline on it won't make it happen sooner.
Mr. Alexander.
Thank you. Your last part there with the conservation, is that above and beyond what I think most of the peninsula cities may be aware of, and that's the Oakwood, or is that included in that as well?
I don't have that detail, but we can get back to you on that.
Okay. And secondly, you mentioned Amazon, and I wasn't aware of this before, but everything I've been reading is that second headquarters is looking at places that have a certain population density. Does our area, the Peninsula Salinas, meet that threshold?
It was actually a choice that was made by the County Economic Development Office, and they thought that this would be a good idea to put, this region and this area on the map, if you will.
Ms. Morton?
It was very informative, and as the city of Marina sat on that joint meeting and the specific plan came through with Steve there answering questions. One of the questions that I have is probably more of a FORA question, is that in the background of our staff report at page 25 is that 1,000 acres of four-doored land was granted to UC for the development opportunities associated with the UC Best Center, which was to be managed by the UC Santa Cruz campus. This question came up at the city hearing, the Planning Commission, Marina City Council joint hearing, is that if in fact there is not going to be an R&D, research development managed, but you're selling the asset of land to a third party, the question becomes, since you're altering the donation portion of this land, does the FORA collect its 50% of land sale revenues?
The property that was deeded to the University of California was under an agreement with the United States government. It was a 14-year agreement that was initiated in 1994 and expired in 2008. So there are no longer any restrictions or constraints on how the University of California can use that property. Property did not go through the Fort Ord Reuse Authority to be conveyed, and therefore we don't have any control or authority over another state agency in that regard. So whatever they do with the property is the university's ownership and their decision to make.
And just to comment, that was the concern of the city of Marina, as this is being thought to in its specific plan to be developed for hotels, for housing, for any type of use, that is in competition with the development that the city of Marina is trying to do also on the former Port Ord lands such as the dunes, that we have competitive uses happening because of the limited demand. And the city of Marina is required in any of its transactions to contribute its 50% of the land sale values to contribute to the fulfillment of the base reuse plan. And we're giving preferential treatment for competing use of assets. And so it's something that I'm asking for consideration. It's something that I've asked our city to look at, is what is, if any, recourse.
Is there any other? Yes.
Just a brief comment, just on the cannabis R&D aspect. I'm pretty excited that UC Santa Cruz is interested in partnering with UC San Diego to bring such a research facility to Monterey County. We all know that Monterey County will be among the top 3 counties when it comes to cultivation and manufacturing. But more recently, I've been approached and heard about other commercial interests wanting to do the R&D aspect of this new industry that we have in our county. And at least I know UC Santa Cruz presents a different approach, because as a research institution, you're able to have much more leverage. I think for the commercial side, they still have to wait till the Bureau of Cannabis Control even creates a new permit for the R&D side, which currently doesn't exist, as they're busy with just dealing with medical and adult use that will kick in next year. So anyway, so that kind of just shows all of us that UC Santa Cruz is ahead of the game and could bring something like that much sooner, even though I know talks are very early, but it certainly is very promising for our county.
Thank you for that. We're hopeful that we're going to bring something real to the table, and hopefully we'll be working with the county and with the DA at the federal level to make sure that, you know, all the permits and all the requirements are accounted for.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you for a very informative presentation.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll move on to item 8B, which is the second vote on the Transition Task Force recommendation. The motion that was approved by the board at the last meeting is to create a single entity successor, joint powers / joint powers authority, seek extension of the Community Facilities District powers to the successor, and utilize implementation agreement percentage assignment for jurisdictions fair and equitable contribution for the successor to complete FORA programming. And Mr. Hulamard. Yeah. I will be we had a considerable public and board discussion on this item, and we've had all had opportunity to review letters, articles in the news, staff follow-up on board questions, and the board report. I'm hopeful that we can have a focused approach by receiving the staff report to be followed by a motion to take the second vote. Then I expect to have the board deliberation on the second vote to be followed by public comment to the extent it does not duplicate comments from the October 26th meeting. In other words, if you had your comments at the last meeting, they're on the record, and any new comments will be heard today. But if you were part of the first meeting and your comments are on the record, then we're going to go ahead and limit that. So, Ms. Damon.
Thank you, Chair, members of the board. Many of you were here during my last presentation on this subject matter, and I'm under strict orders from the executive officer to keep it under an hour. I will not be sitting today, so I am standing in order to help with that. Just wanted to clarify and go over it's your second vote. Your chair already read the second vote, so that's going to be a very quick slide. And then there were some questions that came up in the audience, and I just wanted to clarify and provide. It's not new information. I think I fully addressed it, but I prepared some slides to help demonstrate some of that that information. So here was your second vote. It's still your second vote. We showed you this last time. These are your funding obligations. And it shows most of the dollars that are generated to retire the $179.5 million obligations are generated by the Community Facilities District. Financing is a key component to the transition plan. I think everybody is legitimately concerned about how we deal with that issue. And so I wanted to provide some additional information about that, not additional, but clarifying information about that. If the FORA CFD is not extended, then the cities and the county must find a replacement revenue in order to implement a transition plan. And I'm pretty certain I said that last time too. In case I didn't, I'm saying it this time. So the question was asked, there must be a mistake in the language of the CFD that was in the staff report. And do we even need legislation? And the short answer to that is yes. And here's the language that contains the information. And there's a disagreement between the rate and method of apportionment, which is where this language is from. It's the notice of special tax. And you can see it has the tax ends in 2013, 2014, or when FORA terminates, but in no event later than 2051. So to me, that is it 2051? Is it when FORA terminates? There is some question about that. However, in consulting with Authority Council and others, the information that we presented at the last board meeting is exactly the same. There are only two ways to extend your mellow Bruce. One is to extend the FORA Act. And I think I made this point last time, but I will reiterate it. That does not mean extend FORA. That means extend the FORA Act. Fix whatever else you think is wrong with the FORA Act, but extend the date so that FORA, in whatever configuration that is decided upon to look like, continues. That has the effect of extending your CFD. And I use the words FORA Light, FORA Shell. I suggested at some point that we eliminate the unanimous first vote rule. Maybe that's something that needs to be fixed when the FORA Act is looked at and revised. Or maybe the consistency determinations need to be looked at, that process. Those are all things that could be amended and extended if the FORA Act were extended. And also, that would extend the Community Facilities District and your financing would remain in place. The other method of extending the Community Facilities District is what I said before, is take a vote and amend Mello-Roos. So you need a vote. We're being advised it's most likely a vote would be required to fix that language ambiguity, if you will, in your rate and method of apportionment. If FORA goes away and you had a successful vote extending the date to a later date, then you would still need to amend Mello-Roos to address how to transfer the CFD to another successor entity, whether that's a city, the county, a JPA, whoever is going to be managing the rest of the program. That transfer mechanism doesn't currently exist in the Mello-Roos statute. So that information is completely the same. And as I think I suggested last time, there were additional amendments to Mello-Roos that might be considered. For example, addressing the issue of building removal as an allowable expense that could be financed with a community facilities district. And if that were going to be changed in the FORA Community Facilities District, that would also need a vote because that was not included in our original formation documents as an allowable expense. But if a city or a county were developing a new Community Facilities District and Mello-Roos were amended to include building removal as an allowable expense, that could be included in a new district or in an amendment that is voted in on the FORA district. Moving to the next item of clarification has to do with the administrative liability. So I'm drawing your attention just to that right-hand voting on using the voting percentage to allocate administrative liabilities, and that's the CalPERS liability. And last time I described that CalPERS has a process by which they calculate the terminated agency unfunded liability. Today, that liability is estimated to be between 6.6 million and 8.8 million. FORA has set aside about 7.3 million to address that liability. As FORA gets closer to a dissolution date, there will be a resolution that this board passes and notice provided to CalPERS, and they will perform another actuarial number. So we are providing, and it could be $7 million as is shown in this slide, or it might be something else. So we are showing a range, a bigger range. If the liability is 0, so if we've set aside enough to address the liability, then there's no unfunded gap. But if the gap turns out to be, let's say, $1 million, we're showing the rounding error. So before we rounded up, and we showed you at 8%, but this is what it actually looks like. It's 7.69, I think, percent. And 7.69% for one vote of $1 million shortfall is about $77,000. That's approximately your financial risk associated with this part of a transition plan. If it's a $7 million obligation, you can see that the number is pretty close to what we showed you last time, $538,461.54. So pretty darn close with the rounding error issue there. So you can see 1 vote, 3 votes, 2 votes. That's how it goes. And finally, frequently asked questions. Staff has updated the frequently asked questions on the FORA transition webpage. You can find it, and the public can find it at this link. And that is the rest of the story. Hold it. I was under an hour, right?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, we'll have questions on this clarifying information. Anything? Yes, Ms. Morton.
Thank you, Sherry, for your clarification. So when the motion was made the first go round on October 26th, there was a discussion about participation in the future joint powers agreement would be voluntary. Is that what this motion that we're voting on today contemplates?
My understanding is that what we're doing now is going to vote on what we voted on last time.
I'm trying to understand the motion.
Yeah, well, and we're going to have a whole lot of meetings between now and the end of this process where we'll clarify and form whatever that JPA is, or if it's a JPA, and that will inform us on how that will be done. Right now, we're just going for the concept that it's going to be a single entity. We're not trying to establish the rules of that yet.
So whether it's voluntary or involuntary will be determined later.
Right.
So the question that I'm asking then is, our implementation agreements, one of the sectors of this motion is laid out in our report, is utilize the implementation agreement percentage assignment for a jurisdiction's fair, equitable contribution to successor to complete the FORA program. Whether or not Marina, for example, would be required to commit 50% of its land sale revenues plus tax increment to this new entity is yet to be decided, because this motion does not contemplate whether or not it's going to be mandatory or voluntary participation. Am I understanding that correctly? Okay. Then the other, as to your point here about the FORA Act, and you said that one of the measures that can happen is the extension of the FORA authority, but not FORA. And my question, my understanding in reading the Authority Act is that no member sitting at this table is required to be a member of FORA. that we can elect to be a member of FORA, and we pay our $14,000 per seat to sit here. But the Authority Act has jurisdiction over our lands. So an extension of the Authority Act would continue to give the new configuration of FORA authority over the totality of each jurisdiction's lands. Is that correct?
Actually, I am not certain that that is correct, and that was the point of, for example, addressing the community concerns. If that's a concern that Marina has about ongoing jurisdiction over all of the lands, then that is something that could be addressed in an amendment to the FORA Act. This is solely targeted for extension of the Community Facilities District, not necessarily extending FORA in exactly the same configuration with the nature and extent of the same powers it currently has. And let me, I was clear about that, I thought, last time, but if I wasn't clear about it, hopefully that clarifies it.
You may be clear, the motion is unclear, so thank you. I have one other, or two other follow-up questions. The CFD agreements. So currently, I understand what you're saying is that we would have to create a new Mello-Roos for future development. Each jurisdiction or the new FORA would create a new CFD going forward?
No. The new FORA, if the FORA Act is extended and FORA is extended in a different configuration, even with slightly different powers, the existing Community Facilities District would continue because FORA's termination date will be extended. It just will may look like a different FORA.
Okay. One of the issues that's coming forward that for consideration in my jurisdiction, and I'm assuming Seaside and every place else, is that if FORA sunsets in 2020, the concern has been raised that you raised to us at the last meeting, as in addition in the transition task force meetings, that the CFD would no longer be collectible because you cannot assign it, correct?
Yes, and that's what's contained in this presentation as well. You would have to amend Mello-Roos to allow the CFD to be transferred to an entity, a successor entity. And under the motion, as I understand it, it would be one entity, whether that's a JPA or some other kind of an entity. JPA is what I'm going to use for ease of discussion today. There's no mechanism for a military base authority like FORA to transfer a Mello-Roos district. There's only authority for a county to transfer to a city. That's it.
Right. So as I'm sitting here today as a city council person in Marina, if in fact I were going to be entering into a land sale contract or a development agreement with a developer, is it feasible, or it seems it would be feasible for the city of Marina, city of Seaside, Sand City doesn't have any land, Delray Oaks, to be writing these agreements that the CFD, a Mello-Roos being created in the future, be payable to the city itself. Can that occur in our current contract negotiations? For example, Seaside right now is negotiating for a potential development, and can we build into the language for that CFD to be paid to the successor agent or to the city, or somehow structure these contracts that protect us as we're going forward? Because we've made the distinction between entitled projects and those that are not yet entitled, and I'm trying to have instruction from our legal staff here to all of us on how can we best protect ourselves in this time of unknown as we write these agreements.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that, but that that is something that we'll be talking about as we start looking at CFD and what the options are for that, and
Okay.
We'll be looking at all those different options because I'm sure we're going to think of at least
500
50
more. Yeah.
50 each on how best to approach that.
And the last question that you addressed was the PERS obligation, and you indicated that our proportionate share would be basically on voting. And my question is, what is the impact of the recent legal decision that came out of Los Angeles, where when the agency closed, the actual PERS obligation was not passed on to the member entities, but the court held that it results in a reduction in benefits. So this would be a voluntary for all of us to agree to this, correct?
Without having, I've looked at that decision. I'm aware of the decision. I'm not certain exactly the same rule would apply in this particular situation, as we have a separate state act that says all of FORA's obligations and liabilities must be addressed in the LAFCO process. I think that is a distinguishing point. I think they terminated their joint powers agency agreement without LAFCO intervention and a subsequent order of LAFCO, because the joint powers agreement is a voluntary agreement that's entered into under the Joint Powers Act. So there are some distinguishing characteristics that I don't know exactly the legal answer, but it's very possible that this would be imposed through the LAFCO process. If there were $1 million liability now, LAFCO would could impose this if this is the part of the transition plan. It says, we all agree, the board has approved a transition plan. It says administrative liabilities are assigned on the basis of voting percentage, and this is what it is.
So it's an open legal question.
I think that's probably the short answer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for answering my additional questions, Sherry.
Director Gard.
Thank you, Chair. In the LA one, the issue at hand was CalPERS retroactively required more funding. This is what's known at the time. So what we're talking about here, so I think it's two different issues, but it's a real important question. So my real question is, what is the best way that staff would like for us to bring these kind of questions to you so that they don't get lost, so we don't have 9 million tiny little stickies on our notebooks or you on yours, and so that we really are getting to the heart of the questions that need to be answered for our special interests and constituencies? What's the best practice? Or you want to think about it?
We've always appreciated direction from the board. Typically, we get our direction from the committees, from the executive committee in particular, provides some rather significant direction as it pertains to board agendas, and so forth. My thinking is that we should be bringing issues back to the board regularly for consideration. The board has already adopted a budget that provides for taking us through this process. And we do have about a year to get a full transition plan in place and have it presented to LAFCO. That's going to require these elements that you saw today and the other elements that Sherry brought in before. So staff is going to need to bring back a work plan to the board and say, here's what we think are the pieces and elements that we're going to bring back and what order they think they need to be presented to the board, so that those decisions can be made by the board and we can take them forward. That would be my thinking about a process. That's pretty much what we do all the time. But the board may choose to do something different. The board chose to appoint a committee, transition task force, to look at the structure.
My question's somewhat different. Is that that's after you get the question and have worked on an answer. My question to you is, how can we best, most constructively, make sure our queries are getting to you for consideration by staff to then bring back to us? I'm just saying is that to answer our questions, I've got a list, and for you to answer them, boom, may not get the best answer. But a listserv, send it to the executive committee, send it to Sherry, I don't know. But you're going to get a ton more questions, and I'd really like to make sure we get all of our questions answered.
I think the best approach is for us to write them down or put them in some printed format, share them with staff, so that they can pull them together so that we can all see them, because they may generate more questions.
And by staff, you mean Sherry? You want it to come to you first?
Yeah, come to him first, and then, because there's so many different categories that we're talking about, Sherry may be well-versed in one category, but it may be a financial question. It may have to go to Helen or some other, or building removal will go to Stan. So I think if we try to categorize them in our comments or our questions so that they can be easily handled by staff, and then we get a and a errata sheet of what all those are, and you know, because I'm sure that's going to generate more questions.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any other questions? Mr. Moore.
Two real short, quick questions. On page 29 of the board packet, in the second full paragraph, down near the bottom, there's a sentence that ends with a comma and reads, water augmentation and wastewater service. Could staff tell us what the rest of that sentence is? That's question number one.
Where?
Second full paragraph, page 29, down near the bottom of that paragraph. It's about the third sentence from the end.
Oh, sorry.
It's errata.
29.
Delete it.
This was downloaded from the web.
Actually, that's from the October 26th board report, if I may, Chair. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and it might have just been
It looks like it's just
copied over from
it's just
that.
it looks like it's just a sentence fragment there that water augmentation and wastewater service in the capital improvement program are $17.8
Got it. Okay.
million.
And then the other quick question is in the sentence before that, it says FORA staff assumed that water service and wastewater rights will be, future tense, assigned to Marina Coast Water District. Who owns the water and wastewater rights currently?
I think this came up at the last meeting, and we answered the question at the last meeting, and we also provided a change in the frequently asked questions. This was reprinted from last month, and so that was an error brought up last month, and we already addressed it, sir.
Thank you.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, I'll open it up to public comment. If you've spoken on this issue before, please refrain from coming to the mic.
I have new comments to your new thing there. The Melrose bill has not been implemented. It was written so that the local community could be taken care of. And to keep on amending, it had been amended before, and it's being amended again.
Ms. Stone?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. It's being amended again. It talked about low and low income housing. It talked about how the community can be recover. That has not happened. And to change it again is keep changing the community reuse plan. The community is not here. They're not in this room. And anything that is happening here, the community should be involved. The decisions that are being made is not just up to this board and who is in this room today. There's a whole community out there that is still suffering, that is not being dealt with at this table or in this room. So you need to reconsider what you're doing. We are the research hub of California or the whole nation. As far as the University of Davis, California Davis, we have been there. We have talked with them. We have tried to work with them, the University of Santa Cruz. And the community is still being left out of all the decisions that are being made by people that are responsible for us and for our community. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, point of clarification. A moment ago you said if you'd spoken at the last meeting on this not to come to the mic.
Yes.
You mean unless there is some type of new comments that they want to make.
New information.
So
right.
you're just requesting that they not get up and repeat themselves.
Right.
Thank you.
Hello. Do you want me to hold it? Please don't make me hold it.
No.
There we go. I'm Dawn Alva, and I will not repeat my past comments. If you guys know that my interest to sunset FORA. What I am up here to request is I have a difficult time with the lack of transparency. I've tried to find the options that the transition task force fully vetted. on the website, and I cannot. I can find a slick little marketing video that's easy to find. So what my request is, because my assumption, I guess, is that the task force thoroughly vetted all options, and my assumption is that the Finance Committee then had a chance to look at those options and addressed any financial, monetary assumptions that were made by the staff. So I would request as a public individual to be able to see what those options that were vetted. That would also give me a better handle or a better feeling of the biases that are natural in a staff with some of the options being discontinuing their own personal jobs. I think that's the only thing that I have that's new. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Paula Pillow. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I did not speak before. I've been a resident of the Ord community for 20 years, and I do not support this motion. I continue to support having an independent third-party analysis that would look at all the alternatives and produce recommendations for an actual transition plan. Then and only then will this board have met its legislative mandate. It's been asserted that there's too short a timeline to procure and produce such a study, and that's just not true. When a similar proposal was brought forward in 2016, Senator Monning indicated that it was not a transition plan as was required by law, nor is what you have in front of you today. In fact, it was just reported in the Monterey County Weekly that Senator Monning is emphasizing that there's still time, and legislation, if it needed to happen, would occur or could occur in 2018 or 2019. And importantly, that he doesn't want a rash decision made. When Mr. Edelin made his motion on October 26, he stated that the jurisdiction's participation in a successor JPA would be entirely voluntary. And I know you just had a discussion on this. I didn't see it in this motion, so I still would like to know if that statement that Mr. Edelin made as part of his motion where he said, I moved to the recommendation of the staff or the transition committee, I want to know if that's in this motion. Also, he referenced CSUMB as being one of the stakeholders who have become a part of the new JPA. I didn't really see this in the report, and this presentation reflected a zero liability, so that's a curiosity to me. I've long been a supporter of CSUMB having a vote at this table because I recognize that it has a strong presence in the Ord community as well as having an economic state and being a voting member. Currently, it has no vote, but given the statement by Mr. Edelin in making this motion, I would ask that any voting board members who themselves have an economic interest via CSUMB employment or their immediate family members' employment with CSUMB disclose that now and either recuse themselves from this vote based on that economic interest or that they simply abstain from the vote. Finally, I would also ask that any voting board members whose jurisdictions have indicated they would likely not participate in a new JPA also abstain from voting on this motion. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Audra Walton. I am a resident of Marina, and I'm always fidgety with this thing. Can you tell I don't like mics and all of the attention? Well, okay. So, FORA's slick new advertising video highlights the achievements of FORA and FORA's member jurisdictions and state and federal agencies. It cannot be concluded that the achievements of the lands of Fort Ord depicted in this video are the result of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority solely. For example, the existence and success of CSUMB is outside of the purview of FORA and its governance. The plans for establishment of a California State University on Fort Ord land existed prior to the creation of the Fort Ord Reuse Authority in 1994 and prior to the adoption of its reuse plan in 1997. There are a wide range of responsibilities where FORA has achieved its original objective. We have a reuse plan, and future development will be consistent with this regional vision. After 26 years, FORA has fulfilled its purpose. There are also a wide range of responsibilities where FORA has fallen short, including blight removal, groundwater management, transportation, and public accountability. The continuation of FORA will not contribute to removal of blight in the future, and there are competent agencies to address the water and transportation impacts from development. At a cost of $5 million per year, FORA is unnecessary to the implementation of the reuse plan today. In 2013, when FORA first requested a 10-year extension and pointed to the economic slowdown as justification for more time, the legislation only granted a 6-year extension with the message, "No more extensions, take care of business in the next 6 years." After more than 20 years of operations, including 6 years more than originally legislated, how does FORA justify more time? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Berkeley, a resident of Marina. And I'd like to vote against this motion because neither the extension of FORA nor the replacement of FORA, as is proposed in the current motion, should be approved by this board prior to receipt and review of a true transition plan. After 2 transition task force committees and 2 years of meetings, it is evident the FORA staff has a conflict of interest in creating the legislatively required transition plan. Both Supervisor Parker and Supervisor Adams address this issue well in their co-authored opinion piece appearing in the Monterey Herald. Staff's conflict of interest is spotlighted by its recommendation for a 5-year extension and the January 27, 2016 memorandum written by Assistant Executive Director Officer Steve Ensley. This recommendation was made prior to the extension of any transition task force. Then, after months of meeting, the 2016 Transition Task Force Committee concluded with a recommendation to extend FORA to 2037. Its members were asked by staff to vote yes or no to the question, should FORA be extended? No consideration was given to a transition plan as an alternative. The third effort for a transition plan conducted by staff resulted in the conclusionary recommendation of the 2017 Transition Task Force for FORA to, quote, transition to a new entity with the same powers and authority as FORA. This, too, is an extension of FORA. FORA staff guided all 3 of these recommendations, all 3 of which were made prior to the development and consideration of a transition plan. Because of the staff's conflict of interest, the FORA Board of Directors must retain an objective third-party consultant who can develop transition options for the board to consider. At minimum, such options must include the termination of FORA consistent with current state law, the identification of responsibilities that require no further action, and the potential assignments of unfulfilled responsibility to other jurisdictions and agencies. Any extension of FORA must be premised upon supported findings of a true need for the authority to continue, if such exist. The public deserves the full and impartial analysis of alternatives, as Assembly Bill number 1614 requires. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I did speak last time. I'm Nancy Amadeo. I'm a council member from the city of Marina. I'd like to echo Lisa Berkeley's comments. But I also have a question. I think they may have been addressed, but there seems to be some confusion about what this motion means. So let me ask my question and hopefully it will be clarified. We've heard we don't know if this is going to be FORA light, FORA simple, FORA whatever, because, gee, that hasn't been done. But last meeting, what I heard was that as long as the FORA document was intact and was amended, that it didn't matter. However, well, I also heard that we didn't have to join if we didn't want to. So if we don't have to join, does that mean that the successor agency would have the right to take the funding from non-members in order to meet their obligations? Roadways, water, etc. I felt like today I heard, yes, they could take it away from us because, gee, this new agency would allow them to do it even if they weren't members. And I find that untenable, that you would take money from us without our voice and yet telling us we don't have to have a voice, we can withdraw. So I would like some explanation. If Marina decided to withdraw, if Seaside decided to withdraw, do you get half of our land sales? Do you get
our the CFD that would come from our development. That doesn't seem to be addressed in the motion, and it doesn't seem to be addressed in the presentation today or the presentation last month. Thank you.
Okay, any more public comment? Please do not repeat what you presented last time.
I didn't speak last time.
Okay.
I was out
Thank
of the
you.
country. So, my name is Kathy Biala, and I'm a resident of Marina. Please enter my, but also others' comments into the public record. I come before you in an effort to maintain the deadline for FORA to sunset in 2020, granted by a generous extension. This was a legislative mandate and must be respected. I was offended by the addition of the FORA on the FORA website of a marketing video paid by taxpayers. The timing for this is made to further their existence despite a legislative mandate. That FORA should now spend additional money on a marketing piece that specifically uses FORA proponents rather than use representatives from other key stakeholders is unconscionable. This is why the conflict of interest of FORA planning their own transition is not workable. As a citizen, I object to a further extension because I question the effectiveness of FORA going forward. I see regional and local issues that have not suggested a dynamic entity over the last 24 years. Why is there still stunningly visible presence of military blight? Shouldn't there have been a realistic plan to ensure its ultimate removal by the end of FORA's tenure? Why has there no priority to the 2nd Avenue extension, the lack of which divides Marina in 2 sections of economic diversity? Why is UC Santa Cruz via MBES taking leave of our region? Over the many years, have we exhausted all avenues to encourage them to stay rather than their selling off the majority of their parcels? Why was the RUDGs finally approved in 2016 when much of the ore development had taken place without such important guidelines? Though I applaud the quality of this work, I now understand how utterly late this was in truly assisting regional projects. Why is it the FORA could not even support MCWD to become an exclusive GSA when FORA was critical in setting up decades ago the ore communities being responsibly served by MCWD? Why has all this happened? I respectfully submit that the regional concept does not apply anymore, and that when a body with voting privileges has a predominance of members who make decisions that do not directly impact their jurisdictions, there will be political maneuvering. We have competent regional agencies that can and will assume the proper decisions once FORA closes. For the state legislators who participate in FORA, I urge you to hold fast on closure of FORA in 2020. FORA or a JPA represents duplicated money that could be utilized in many other ways. I believe that a vote on a JPA is premature until specific critical details are known, so an informed vote is considered legitimate. Thank you very much.
George Riley. I think several things have not been addressed here at all, or at least if they have, it hasn't been very public. Your base reuse plan is your baseline for everything you say you need to continue to do in order to meet the goals and designs or the objectives of that plan. I think it's time to reevaluate that plan. It's more than 20 years old. The economy has changed. The environment in this area has changed. The water issues have changed. The politics have changed. As long as you continue to say you want to institute a Christmas list from 25 years ago, you're on a strange path. Second, I think this process you're using is forcing time to go by and be wasted by wanting a question from one of your members about a question about something through Chevy and something through the transition plan, I forget. And the recommendation was send it to staff, we'll answer a question. The very process of solving problems relates to dialogue, not sending questions in, getting an answer, and then responding to that question. It takes time to do that. And one person's question triggers other people's questions and triggers an interaction that can lead to somewhere. But the question and answer process gets you nowhere, or at least it takes a lot of time. And I think the more time that goes by serves somebody's purpose. Somebody's purpose. And I think the more you go down the road without specific plans, without specific options, without a list of potential risk going down path A or path B or path C, you are just wasting time. And I don't think this body has the structure to make that happen. If you don't go out for an outside consultant, you are, I think, instituting a kiss of death that's pretty obvious to the rest of the community. The only ones that are hanging on to FORA the way it is, or the transition that's the simple, I like the version, FORA simple, as opposed to shell and light. The only ones hanging on to that are those that have something, let me say it differently. The only ones that are hanging on to that are not investing in the dialogue for an option. They're taking the easy way out. And just look around at who votes certain ways. They're not the ones that are taking the time to evaluate the options, evaluate seriously, bouncing off and off, who has stake in the game, who doesn't. It's the ones that are voting for the transition the way it's being proposed are those that want the easy way out. I suggest if you don't take the hard way out, this is going to die on its own without Monting doing a damn thing. And you're not helping your case by continuing to just drill along with some conceptual idea that this thing might just work out in the long run. It ain't going to happen that way. If you don't do the work, you're not going to get the outcome that you want. I suggest you should pay attention to what outcome you want.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. Seeing no one else at the mic, we'll bring it back. There were several questions and some misunderstandings. The Transition Task Force had a charge to pull the information and options together. It's the board's responsibility to put the plan together, to make those decisions. 5 or 6 people weren't going to do that for the board. And staff is providing us information, but it's the board that will be making those decisions. And as far as the consultant, this board voted on that last month and voted no. As far as voluntary in the whatever form we're going with the single entity, that is yet to be determined because we haven't gone through that process yet. And question and answers, I thought that was pretty strange. We're not supposed to ask questions and get answers. If we don't do that, then we're not being transparent. So I don't know what side of the coin to fall on that one. But there were several others, but it would take a long time to answer all those questions. But I think we need to, yes.
There is one that was asked, I think, by Councilwoman Amadeo relating to a successor agency. Would that successor agency have the right to recover revenue from a non-member that didn't join the successor agency?
And we can't answer that question at this time because we don't have that entity set up yet, and we don't know what the rules are going to be. That is yet to be determined. Yep. Okay. So, I think we'll just cut to the chase and vote on this thing. Yep.
I move we take the second vote on the Transition Task Force recommendation.
I second it. Okay, there's a motion and a second. So all those in favor, let's see a roll call vote, please. We're voting on the question. Roll call vote, please.
Are you going to give any chance for board members to comment before we vote, or?
Well, I mean, if you want to, I mean, we need to get this done, whether it goes one way or the other. Go ahead and comment, Mr. Hoppe.
Well, I'd like to just explain to people my vote. I was on both transition task forces. We considered many options. It wasn't like this was the only option we considered. We considered all sorts of different options of how to unwind FORA, how to disperse different functions in different places. We considered the idea of a separate, completely new JPA, and we considered the idea of extending FORA. And we looked at the various costs, the financial implications, legal implications, all sorts of different implications. So that it isn't like, and I guess I apologize because I think we haven't done a good job of sharing with the public all of the information that we considered. And I think it was Kathy who asked that we make more of that available on the website, and I think staff should do that. But for me, one of the major reasons is the $71 million entitlement for projects, that those projects cannot be charged a CFD going forward, but they have mitigation costs associated with them. Those mitigation costs are going to be borne by the region. So that is a significant cost factor that I don't think is fair, and I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's equitable. So that is one major reason why I am supporting the motion. The second major reason has to do with regional decision making. I don't always agree with the decisions here. I'm quite often in the minority, but we have a regional forum. You can come and speak. You have a chance to be heard. If decisions regarding the former base are only made on a jurisdictional basis, yes, people from other cities could come and speak, but it's highly unlikely their voices would have the same value as they have at a regional forum. So that's another reason. And then finally, there's enforcement of the plan. For me in particular, prevailing wage and affordable housing are key elements. And I prefer to have the option for our region to speak to those here at this forum when it comes to project consistency determination. So for those reasons, I'm supporting the motion.
Mr. Alejo, you had a comment?
I'm new on these deliberations, but I did want to comment just because I was, and I'm not speaking for my good friend Senator Bill Monty, but I was one of the co-authors as part of the Monterey Bay delegation that co-authored AB 1614, the extension. I just wanted to say for the record, first of all, and it's well documented in the legislative record, that there was a lot of reasons for the delay of the work of FORA, right? Of course, the early lawsuits on the munitions, and then the work that needed to be done was much greater than was originally anticipated, and a lot of that delayed the transfer of lands and so on and so forth. But the bill in its original version did contemplate a longer period of time. It was 10 years originally, and then as part of the art of compromise in Sacramento, Senator Monning reduced that to 6. Even then, I knew whether 6 years was the right number. There was doubts about that because with the volume of work that still need to be done and the goals that are laid out in the original plan, that's a very short period of time. So I just want to put that on the record that, I mean, that was the thoughts as legislators, whether that period of time was adequate, wasn't questioned on my mind at the time. And I know the bill that was signed by the governor does require some transition plan to be submitted by the end of next year. It doesn't say what that is, but I do think it's important that even though Senator Monning hasn't made any commitments on carrying any bill, he's made that very clear to everyone. But nonetheless, there is at the minimum 2 additional legislative sessions in 2018 and 2019, and usually 2020 is like cutting it too close, but certainly there's 2 legislative sessions to explore that option as well. And I just want to put that out on the record, even though that we're voting on a JPA today, that looking at the next 2 legislative sessions also as if there is some other form, maybe not exactly the same, but another form that might be also effective. I think that's worth exploring. Thank you.
Okay. So getting back to the vote, roll call vote, please.
Director Rubio?
Yes.
Director Parker? No. Director Alejo?
Yes.
Director Phillips?
Yes.
Director O'Connell?
No.
Director Hoffa?
Yes.
Director Alexander?
Yes.
Director Gunter?
Yes.
Director Reimers? Director Edelin?
Yes.
Director Morton?
Yes.
Director Carbone?
Yes.
Director Garfield?
Yes.
You have 10 yes votes.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for a very lively issue. And I'm sure we're going to be, battling with this one throughout the next year. And I anticipate that we'll be having special meetings. So be prepared for that. If we're going to get this work done, it's going to require a lot of work from us and some dedication of time. Thank you. The next item is on-call engineering and design services second vote. Mr. Said.
Thank you very much, Mayor Rubio. Thank you very much, Board. As you know, this is a second vote on the Whitson Engineering contract for on-call and engineering and design services. Just as a reminder, this is a contract to replace a previous engineering contract with a new engineering contract. The previous engineer, 15 years, was with us, Cregan and D'Angelo. Their contract term has come to an end, and now we need to replace them with a new engineer. There's been a lot of changes over those last 15 years, and so we're seeking to replace that contract. Simply, this is a master services contract that is a standard form, and we have attached 3 service work orders. Those work orders basically outline the types of activities that the engineer may do underneath this contract. It limits their work, and it allows us to be able to complete the planning, specification, and estimation phase on the approved roadways for South Boundary Road and Giggling Road. The recommendation is that you would approve to take a second vote for the service work orders W1 through W3, and that you would approve a master engineering services contract with Whitson Engineer not to exceed $1.5 million. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any questions for staff?
Yes, if I may, Chair. Thank you. Last time I cast a vote in favor of this, with the understanding we'd have 30 days or so for Authority Council to take a look at the concerns that were expressed in a letter from, I think, Keith Ford Wild, one of those, if I recall. And my question is, it was indicated that this was simply, for lack of a better term, a formality. Has Authority Council had the opportunity to determine if there's any validity to the concerns that were expressed in the letter? Or do you feel comfortable with this being simply a formality?
I do feel comfortable.
And you've had the opportunity to look at the letter and feel comfortable with it as to not having a real validity to it as far as the concerns?
I don't know if comfortable is necessarily the characterization I would have, but I think you can go forward today, and you may receive opposition and legal challenge, but I think we're
good. We're in sound ground, solid ground.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Moore. And then
So, if I could direct your attention to page 57 of the board packet, at the very top of the page, it's part of Exhibit D with tasks 1 and 2, and I distinctly recall at our last meeting that the maker of the motion indicated that the task, etc., would be removed from tasks 1 and 2, but I still see that etc. is a task, part of the tasks under tasks 1 and 2. So my question is, are we giving this etc. carte blanche in these 2 tasks, or will that expression actually be removed from the document before it's issued?
It will be removed, and should have been.
Thank you.
Mr. Hop.
So I just kind of wanted to follow up on the question about the letter that we received in regard to this action. And I think one of the concerns was that somehow this would pave the way or open the door for this contract to be used for work on the East Side Parkway. Could you answer that concern, that this does not have anything to do, this does not open the door for any sort of work on East Side Parkway?
I don't think it does. It does not open or pave the way for work on the East Side Parkway.
Pave the way. He made it funny.
No pun intended.
Okay, is there any other? Yes.
Yes, I had some questions. So on page 32 of our staff report, and I know there were several amendments made in the October 13, 2017 board meeting. And one was for 3 years, the contract duration, 3 years, or the transition of FORA, is whichever is later. So is the intention that this terminates in 3 years, regardless if FORA doesn't transition and FORA is extended? It's because whichever later the way it's written, if FORA is extended, you have a gaping hole there that needs to be cleaned up in this language. So I'm just asking that ambiguity be looked at, and I'm trying to understand, is it supposed to go away in 3 years, this contract term?
We will look at that ambiguity.
Okay, perfect. The next thing that I wanted to ask, at the last board meeting, there were amendments made while this meeting was going forward where the descriptions of the project were changed, altered. And so we had reduced the size of the project significantly on Giggling from 8 blocks to 7 blocks, correct, Peter?
The scope of the project remains the same as what was approved in the M&D. So there was no change in the scope of the project.
No, but the contract scope was now, the amendment was that it's a contract for services to have services for Giggling, which spans 7 blocks, not 8 blocks.
We had the engineer bid on the scope as was defined in the M&D. What had happened is in the first draft that was presented to the board, maybe about 3 or 4 months ago, there was a mistype, and that has since been corrected.
So my understanding of what was happening here last time was the issue came up that the projects for which the scope of this bid is for, this contract is for, exceeded what was in the environmental documents. So that there was a motion made here at the public hearing to reduce it from 8 blocks to 7 blocks, and then readdressed that it took off 1,600 feet off of the south boundary road.
No motion was made of that kind.
So then the project, the scoping of this contract differs, the scope of the project exceeds what's in the CEQA document that was completed in 2010.
Mr. Saeed misspoke. If you see in the staff report, it's clarified what was part of the motion, what was it, those changes. You'll see in page 33 of the staff report, what you mentioned just now about South Boundary Road, that approximately 200 feet past Rancho Zacito Road was there's an add-on with the underlined language of approximately 200 feet. That was part of the board motion of the last meeting.
So the motion did make the alterations that I'm...
Yes. So it was, the motion, as you see in the staff report, was modified to be consistent with MND project description.
So smaller than what was in the original contract bid. Can you say that?
The contract is
Yeah.
modified as described in the staff report to clarify that is approximately 200 feet past Rancho Saucito Road, which is the same language included in the MND. So that is now in the contract.
Okay. So the contract of what they're doing in this project is smaller than what they bid on for the 1.5 million, correct? If we've downsized the project in our hearing on October 17th, we were all here, whatever date it was, the 13th, sorry. We downsized the size of the project in the sense that we took off 1,600 feet off of South Boundary Road, and I thought we also took off 1 block off of the Giggling. My question is, in the last month, did staff renegotiate the contract term? Why are we paying 1.5 million for less work? And
It's a not to exceed contract.
It's not to exceed, but in fact, shouldn't we have modified the contract because the bid is to complete the work that's now been diminished in scope? I'm trying to avoid the look of a public gift of funds.
I'm confused. The bid hasn't diminished in scope. All that's happened is that previously it had said that it is going to extend past Rancho Saucito, and we clarified in the language that it was going to extend 200 feet past Rancho Saucito. So there was merely a clarification so that there couldn't be assumption that the road was longer than what was approved in the EM&D. So there has been no shortening of the road because the road was never lengthened. It would be almost like a language trap here if we were to say it's shortened. What's been approved by the board is the M&D. We can't go past what's beyond the M&D. And what was bid by the consultant was what was approved in the M&D.
The bid by the consultant included 1,600 other feet and one more block, is my understanding when we voted last week. And
No.
then
No.
we made the motion.
No.
Well, I make that point. You can disagree with me, but I think those motions that were made last week were made after it went out for bid and after what the bid proposals came in. So the contract terms would vary because they're doing a different scope of work.
There was no contract bid. We sent it out for statement of qualifications. Received qualifications from a number of engineers. We approved all of the engineers as being qualified. We then went into negotiations with Whitson Engineers, as was appropriate for being the most qualified, and we negotiated a scope. The resultant scope is what you have before you.
And the work is for services rendered on a project that has now been changed in its scope to a smaller scope. My question is, why doesn't the contract price also get renegotiated to a lesser 1.4 million? I don't know what the number is, but you're doing less, so why wouldn't you have a lesser contract price? That's the question.
I have no
This
answer
is
for
not
you.
a fixed price contract.
Right. It's a not to exceed number. So
it's not a construction contract. So I mean, you're not reducing
Yeah.
pavement.
Right.
Okay.
Any other questions, Mr. Hop?
So, as I'm understanding the process, we did a request for proposals, and then we picked one respondent and then negotiated with them. But I'm curious why, for a project like this or a contract like this, we didn't simply put out a request for bids and then determine, the most competitive bid among those who are qualified.
This is the standard that we've used for. I don't want to get into. We've always done it this way. It sounds terrible, but the idea is that you have on call an engineering firm that can supply services. So we do the request for qualifications, not a proposal or a bid. So we take the most qualified folks. Sometimes we might take two and interview both of them, refine what their qualifications are and what kind of services they can provide, and how quickly we feel they'll be able to respond to our on-call demands and other design services. In this case, we've had the same engineering firm for a long time. Want to spread it around, use a different firm. We decided to go out with a request for qualifications. Whitson was the firm that was determined to be the most qualified to do this part of it. These are the two elements generally of their on-call services. We may not get anywhere near 1.5 million if we don't need all of that to get the work done. They will only bill according to the work they do and what we approve. So that's how we've done this in the past. Apologize if we haven't been that clear on this process before, but that's what this is.
Then it's
I did
really
have
on
one other question, though.
on a professional contract. That's usually the way it's done in the cities as well. In some cases, we may qualify three firms and rotate them through, and then check to see who's most available at the time that we need the services. In this case, it's one. Mr. Moore.
So, segue on this, and this is something for Mr. Giffen. Previous counsel to Marina Coast Water District some years ago advised us that with respect to professional services, this process is the process that's required by law. Now, that's a question for Mr. Giffen, that professional services, you must go out and do an RFQ. You pick, based on whatever your concerns are, the best qualified, and then you negotiate the price with them. But can you confirm or deny that that's actually a requirement in state law?
I could confirm that. Yep.
Ms. Morton.
Yeah, so just to clarify, the question that I was asking is, we negotiated 1.5 million for a size of a project that was A. We've reduced the size. Shouldn't we renegotiate the price of the contract? But my question that I wanted to ask secondarily is on the top of page 33 in our staff report, and that's where it outlines these changes in the scope of the project. And the second paragraph appearing there states, this modification was made to be more consistent with the environmental assessment initial study mitigated negative declaration project description for South Boundary Road. And my question is we've made it more consistent, but isn't the legal standard for it to be consistent? And the question is, in what other ways is it not consistent with the CEQA documents?
So you're questioning about the term more consistent versus consistent.
Yeah,
so it is consistent with the description. The description says approximately 200 feet past Rancho Saucedo Road.
So in fact, we can strike the word more and be comfortable that this project is consistent. Thank you for the clarification.
Any other questions? All right, I'll take this out to the public, and again, if you spoke on this item before, please refrain unless you have something new. Nothing from the public? Oh.
Michael Solano, Keep Fort Ord Wild. I did speak at the October 13th meeting, so I won't be repetitive of that material. What I'd like to comment on, there's been a couple adjustments made to the contract, but there's numerous other CEQA issues where the contract goes beyond what was envisioned in the MND. So I'm going to turn it over to our attorney, and I would like to submit some additional materials for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Molly Erickson with Stamp Erickson on behalf of Keep Fort Ord Wild. I do have a presentation which I provided to staff earlier. So if we could have that up, please. And while that is being pulled up, this discussion about what was in the RFP, RFQ, all that sort of thing, it seems to me a logical response would be to put up on the screen whatever the RFP or the RFQ said as far as the scope of the contract, and put also in the scope that Whitson actually bid on. That might just resolve the discussion here and now so that there doesn't need to be this confusion and back and forth. Thank you very much. Do I just tell you when I want the next one it moved? All right. Well, can we go back one then, please? This presentation is to point out, as we have pointed out in our previous letters, that there are still problems with the proposed contract for engineering services for these projects. We have submitted a letter and exhibits. We emailed it to you today, also submitted it on a CD, and have handed it in paper copy. And you have copies for all the board members. Has that been distributed? No. Would you do that, please? We urge you to read the letters before you act. It is appropriate to submit public comments at this public meeting and public agenda item. That's when you take public comments. Just want to emphasize that because sometimes there seems to be some antagonism towards public comments during the public comments section. First slide, please. The projects before you do not comply with the FORA urban design guidelines that have been adopted at great expense by FORA and with great fanfare. In 2016, last year, or in 2017, FORA got an award for them. Guidelines make no difference if they're just set on the shelf and not implemented. The proposed projects do not comply in several ways with the adopted guidelines, including the urban design guidelines say this: vehicle lanes of 12 to 14 feet are to be avoided. Sounds pretty mandatory. Are to be avoided because they will encourage highway speeds and lead to potentially lethal outcomes. All right, so the urban design guidelines say no vehicle lanes of 12 to 14 feet. Well, Gigling is proposed to be 14 feet and South Boundary is proposed to be 12 feet. these will encourage highway speeds and lead to potentially lethal outcomes, in FORA's own words. But that is what's in the contract before you today, to put in expansions, road expansions of 14 feet
Ms.
and
Erickson,
12-foot
your
vehicle
time
lanes.
is up.
You weren't timing anybody else, so I'm almost done. I've got a couple more slides.
We timed
Okay, well, I don't
everybody.
see any sort of timeline, so how would I?
I got it right here.
Oh, okay. Well, let me quickly wrap up because I think the next slide. Go
Uh,
ahead. How am I supposed to know
Thank
what
you.
the timing is?
Thank you.
Okay. Can you just quickly flip through the slides? I won't say anything. Go
Thank
ahead.
you.
It's okay. Deny the project.
Oh
Wait a
my
minute.
gosh.
What about all the other slides? Mr. Chair, I object to this since I don't have the 3-minute timer. How am I
sorry.
supposed to know?
I'm sorry, but
All right.
you got the 3 minutes everybody else got.
I spent the first part trying to help with the RFP situation.
That's your determination, not
I
mine.
said before my presentation begins. All right, I'll just tell you, the final slides are photographs of all the oak trees, the 1,000+ oak trees along South Boundary Road that you don't know that this
Ms.
project
Erickson,
would deny. We urge you
thank
to
you.
deny the project. This is a project approval. Keep forward.
Gee, we didn't know that. Okay. Is there any other public comment? Okay, bring it back to the board. What other comments? Mr. Hoffa.
So I have to say, I do think that a valid concern was just raised. I was not aware of the language in our RUDG specifying those road widths, and so I have some concern, and my preference would be to continue this item and ask our attorney to meet with the Keep Port Orward Wild attorney. That would be my preference.
Any other comments? Yes, Mr.
A lot of us were in this very room when we went through the regional urban design guidelines. It was asked on several occasions, are those guidelines law? Do we have to follow the guidelines, or are they guidelines? And it was made emphatically clear they are guidelines. Now we have a legal interpretation on guidelines that we have to do something. They're basically guidelines. That doesn't work. Number two, if we expand the width of these roads, it costs more money. We don't have the money right now. We've only got 2 years to go. If we go back to the drawing board and start all over again with new engineering, and we'll never get this done if FORA goes away in 2 years. This is part of the mitigations for the Habitat Conservation Program, the transportation mitigations, this, along with other roads like Eastside Parkway, which we'll be discussing down the road, I'm sure, on that. But the bottom line is, we've got delay and obfuscate, delay and obfuscate. It's interesting we got this information right now. It could have been given to us last month, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, but it's always the last second. I just had a ding on my phone. Sure enough, we had correspondence from a certain organization right in the middle of the meeting. That's not showing respect to us, giving us enough time for due diligence, and we're not going to delay every time there's some other obfuscation or some other information that's telling us we have to have legal consideration of, quote, guidelines, unquote.
One observation, as we went through the RUDG, many of the jurisdictions asked for the language to be changed from shall. That was taken out because of this very reason. This says vehicles are to be, vehicle lanes of 12 to 14 feet are to be avoided. Doesn't say shall be avoided or will be avoided. It says are to be avoided because it will encourage highway speeds. This is going to be a regional connector. We don't want it to be a small lane. This is not appropriate. I don't think that we get this kind of thing at the last minute and try to make something out of something that's not there. Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering if the simplest act might be to review the wording and just put in the wording that would make it conditional. so that we could make the roads up to this length without being challenged. I think it would be easier than making the road a foot smaller, but that could work too.
I don't know if that's possible.
As staff, we would discourage the board from trying to make project level adjustments and language adjustments when all we're simply doing here is authorizing a replacement contractor that will bring back designs and help to the development of these individual items. This is not a project approval. The review of the project happened years ago, the one that we're talking about here, this roadway. The regional urban design guidelines will need to be addressed in the consistency determination by the City of Delray Oaks on their project. We will have to address that as we move forward with the design of the road. But I would discourage the board from trying to make project level or design related items on an action to replace a contract.
That's true. Ms. Morton.
Yes. So I have just a couple follow-up questions. When we reduce the size by one block and by the 1,600 square length of the road, 1,600 feet, my question is, because these are CIP projects, they're not base mitigations, they're CIP projects, are we leaving that other block and that other 1,600 square feet in our CIP program to be accomplished at a later date with a different project?
The the environmental assessment initial study mitigated negative declaration for both the Giggling and South Boundary roads the project descriptions were the same as the CIP descriptions at the time. And so there's no need for that extra block as in terms of FORA's obligation.
And so our road systems that we have planned will all connect, and we're not worried about, we don't have to do that additional block. We're not going to have it, I don't even know what it connects to. I think it's 8th Street. We're not worried about that. We don't have to do that. That block can just become dirt.
So the block is not dirt. The block, when you go there, is actually cement, but it's not improved to city standards. But when we looked at the 2017 FORA fee reallocation, it studied these improvements along with the rest of the FORA network. It found that completion of these capital projects as described would be mitigating the levels of service at the 2035 build out. So it found that these were adequate.
So these other portions of both of these projects would not still be in our CIP to be accomplished later, correct?
Correct. Okay. They were never
because I'm concerned about piecemealing under CEQA, and that's why I'm asking that question. Then I did want to make a comment as to the RUDGs. We spent $500,000 as a board for creation of the Regional Urban Design Guidelines. We did that in 2015, 2016, getting them approved decades later than we should have done it. And it's only because the reassessment report came out in 2012, bringing forward to the board that this was a problem that we had not addressed that we were required to do. So the fact now that our roads that we designed before we did our work on the RUDG, that they are not in conformity is our responsibility and is our fault. We cannot, as a FORA board member, ask every other jurisdiction to implement and adopt designs that are consistent with this regional vision that we all stand here and champion, that I personally champion and want my city to comply with, if we are not going to do it as the lead agency right now. So the fact that these roads, the Giggling Road, South Boundary and Giggling Road are called out and described in our regional urban design guidelines. Giggling is defined as a boulevard, and South Boundary is described as a parkway. And we all collectively with the community made very defined pictures, scope of what those are to look like, what the lane size is, what's to happen. And now we're going to sit back and say, we don't care. It's very, very hard to move forward with a board that doesn't honor the work and the commitment that our predecessors and our community asked us to do. So I do not support this motion. The other thing that I did note is the oak trees haven't in this document. Every time we've talked about oak trees and different projects, we had counts. This particular CEQA document doesn't have a count of oak trees. I see that noted in this letter. It's hard to read a letter, I understand that, in 5 minutes. But I do also want to state, public comment is for public comment. In an open process, we cannot limit when someone comes to the microphone to bring issues in front of us or bring writings in front of us. That is what public hearings are about. So if it takes us time and it has to come back in 30 days, we should respect that and make sure that we're not going to be sued for doing something incorrectly. Thank you.
During the regional urban design guidelines, well, again, a lot of us were in this room. I asked a specific question. I said, look, the urban design guidelines there's one vision. And I said, how about Pebble Beach? The Pebble Beach estates down there. You're looking at low density. That violates regional urban design guidelines. They have curving roads down there. That violates the regional urban design guidelines. Just about every aspect of the Pebble Beach area down there violates our regional urban design guidelines. Does that mean that if we violate the guidelines now, it's bad? Not necessarily. I think Pebble Beach is a very nice place to live. It all depends on the situation. They were called guidelines because they're guidelines. They're not laws, and they're not to be legally interpreted. That being said, I'd like to make a motion that we take a second vote to approve the Master Services Engineering Design Services contract with Whitsman Engineering, not to exceed $1,500,000. And right afterwards, take a second vote to approve service work orders, W1 document review for $27,500, W2 South Boundary Road Design and Engineering Services for $554,300, W3 Giggling Road Design and Engineering Services for $692,500, and W4 Engineering and Design Services related to utilities, munitions, and explosives of concern and public outreach support on South Boundary Road and Giggling Roads for $225,700.
Is there a second? There's a second. Okay, you had a comment.
Just a quick comment. I just want to express concern that when we do shut down people who are here to make public comment, it's a real, it just contributes to the negative view that the public has of this body.
I would just like to say that it's incumbent upon everyone to adhere to the process that we have. Everybody else took their 3 minutes. And I would think that an esteemed member of the bar would understand what 3 minutes means in the public process. So she has the same bearing as anybody else in this room, the same expectations as anybody else in this room. 3 minutes is 3 minutes.
Mr. Chair, just
Yes.
to clarify, the Brown Act does allow public comment, but this body, like any body, could set reasonable limits to that period of time. And when limits are set, it's also important to be consistent. You can't be arbitrary giving somebody additional time and not the rest of the members of the public limiting them to 3 minutes. So constitutionally, we should be enforcing rules consistently, no matter who they are, what their titles are.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
So I have an interest for my city in seeing the south boundary work completed, but I also have an interest in ensuring that full public participation, help us move forward on that. And I also have an interest in avoiding an unnecessary lawsuit. So I'm not going to support the motion. I think we can have a positive outcome if we delay this and give our attorneys some time to speak with Keep Fort Ord Wild so we can better understand their concerns. So I'm not going to support the motion.
Mr. Moore.
A couple clarifying questions, I guess, for the maker of the motion. First of all, staff several times reiterated that this was proposed not to exceed contract, but I did not hear that in the statement of the motion. And then a second clarifying question, sort of he indicated that this was a motion to go ahead and take the vote. Presumably after you approve a motion to take the vote, you then take the vote. So is this one vote or two votes? And is this not to exceed? Is that the intent of the maker of the motion?
His motion was to approve the item.
Just looking for clarification for the record on the
clarification for the record. This is a one vote, right? Yeah. And let me just say that if the board wants me to, I'm happy to meet with council for KFOW, and we can talk about their issues, and I'm happy to hear them out and inform the board further about their legal risks and benefits. So it's up to the board what you'd like me to do.
You know, I'd like to say that we're approving a engineering contract. We're not approving the project. The project has not been designed yet. This is for the design of the project. If there are issues with the width of the road, now I see that the item about the width of the road is paraphrased. It doesn't say where it came out of the guidelines. Is it for a boulevard? Is that requirement for a boulevard? Is that for a parkway? So, I mean, it could be for some other part of the guidelines. It's not really stated in that letter where that came from. In the quick perusal of the letter that I had, but so I mean, we could be arguing about something that's doesn't relate, but it doesn't relate because we're not doing a project approval. We're approving a contract for an engineer.
So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make
Ms. Reimer first.
Sorry.
Just to clarify, just to paraphrase what you're saying, that we're now dealing with the contract for the work to be designed, and so at that point, our attorney, if we approve it today, the attorney can then speak to the agency that's concerned about it and have more information at the next meeting as far as the design.
Right.
To paraphrase. Thank you.
So I'd like to make a substitute motion.
No substitute motions on a second vote. Okay. Calling for the question. Roll call vote, please.
Director Rubio?
Yes.
Director Parker? Director Alejo? Director Phillips? Director O'Connell?
No.
Director Hoffa? Director Dittis? Alexander, I'm sorry. Director Gunter?
Yes.
Director Reimers? Director Edeland?
Yes.
Director Morton?
No.
Director Carbone? Director Garfield?
Yes.
Nine yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is Water Augmentation Program Update. Oh, excuse me. Authority Council has informed me.
I'm sorry. I thought we were just voting on the first item 1, and then going to take a separate vote on the second item. These are two separate votes. I'm sorry. I misunderstood that. I thought you said in your motion that, yeah. I think we should take one at a time.
Okay, so let's.
That's what we did. That's what we did on the first go round, and I misunderstood.
Okay.
So let's just clarify that.
All right. So on the second part of that motion,
I think we should start from the beginning. Take the first vote. There's a misunderstanding of whether that was one or two votes or one or two items. It's one item, so.
Yeah.
But there's a separate vote for each item.
I know. The motion was to do the one and then the other. Okay.
Then the other.
Okay. So let's take the other vote.
Okay.
Roll call vote.
Director Rubio?
Yes.
Director Parker? Director Alejo, Director Phillips, Director O'Connell,
No.
Director Hoffa, Director Alexander, Director Gunter, Director Reimers,
Yes.
Director Edelin,
Yes.
Director Morton, Director Carbone, Director Garfield. Nine yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. Now we'll hear about the water augmentation program update. Mr. Said?
Thank you again, Chairman Rubio. So what I'll be providing you is a little bit of an update on what's been happening with the water augmentation program. As many of you will recall, there's two parts to that augmentation program. There's the recycled water component, and then there's the additional component that has not yet been identified. So first I'll address the recycled water component. Last year, September 2016, this board approved a reimbursement agreement with MCWD for $6 million in order to fund a shared single water pipeline, water conveyance facility for augmented water. That has been successfully moving forward. MCWD has finished up or wrapped up much of the engineering. Initially, when that project was put together, it was based off of an SRF loan from the State Water Resource Control Board. Forgive me, SRF stands for State Revolving Fund. That loan was meant to fund the project as a single loan. In the process, the state opted to split that loan into two components, and they adjusted the financing in a way that has needed to be addressed by FORA. FORA staff has currently met with Monterey One Water, formerly Monterey Water Resource Pollution Control Agency, and MCWD. And staff is currently working on addressing some of the additional costs and some of the additional concerns that have come up because of the split in the SRF loan. The meetings have been going forward positively, and at this time we anticipate that we will have to bring forward to the board in the upcoming months some sort of adjustment to the costs because of what has happened. So what we're looking to do is apprise you that this is coming forward in the future and that we will have some adjustments that may be for your consideration. The second component has to do with the secondary study, what we call a secondary study. As that study has not yet been identified, or as the second methodology for dealing with water augmentation has not yet been identified, we sought to go out for a study last year in February. We put that out for bid, and we had to close that bid because of some concerns with some policy issues. We then reopened the bid. That bid, and the details are in your board report. That bid, no one bid on the bid. So we put it out, no one responded to it. We did some follow-up, and there were some concerns that a number of engineers had. It conflicted with some other projects, and there were other things like that. So in July and August, we met with MCWD and Monterey One Water again as part of the three-party planning effort, and we identified a method forward to continue on with the study. That methodology is to utilize ACAL Engineering, which is currently a consultant for MCWD. We would be working with their existing contract, and they would be looking into the study for us. All of their work products would be answerable to FORA as the FORA is the lead. So that's just a little bit of an update of where we're at on the water augmentation, and just letting you know that things are coming forward and moving forward at a consistent pace. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Said? Mr. Moore, and then Ms. Garfield.
So just one additional bit of update information. Not only has Marina Coast completed the engineering for the conveyance pipeline that is part of RUAP and Pure Water Monterey, but we already have a contractor who has been approved. We were quite fortunate in that our bid came in within $200,000 of the engineer's estimate on a $27,000 pipeline. So either we got lucky with a contractor. It's a $27 million pipeline. Oh, thousands. Yeah, that would have been really great. We got a really great contractor in that case, or our engineers were real good. And of course, the reason staff will need to come back to you in part is the action the state took with respect to the state revolving fund gave at least us a bit of a concern that there could be an appearance that FORA funds were going to benefit the Pure Water Monterey portion of the project. That's not Marina Coast's call. What FORA does with its capital contributions towards this project is FORA's call. So I think staff will be bringing you something in that regard. But we're all moving forward to make this happen.
Ms. Garfield.
Moving forward is a great thing to hear, isn't it? This is sort of an off-the-wall comment, and I just would like to sort of put a bug in staff's ear as we look at all these complexities of how aspects of FORA might or might not go forward. And I think you've mentioned it before, is we really need to be thinking in every project, in every presentation, what if? What if FORA isn't here to do some of this work? How will that get done? And it's not something you have to answer, but I just wanted to throw that out as a practice we should probably start doing. Thank you.
Mr. Moore?
Just one quick follow-up. I may be able to answer that question. So, not for everything, but your specific question about what if FORA goes away, how does any of this water-related infrastructure work get done and paid for? As a county water district, which is technically our legal entity, we have the power to set fees for developers. It's primarily a capacity charge, or to set fees for our existing consumers to pay for the necessary infrastructure. So if new infrastructure needs to be built, then matter of fact, we're in the middle of a rate study to update both our consumption charges, our meter charges, and capacity charges for all our customers in the Ord community and in Central Marina. We periodically go through that process with an engineering firm to help us get to that point. So going forward, it can be funded. It's covered.
And I think there are at least 6 questions that the board has asked about water issues post-FORA. It has to do with what happens to the allocations, what happens if there's a groundwater sustainability action, do entitled projects get something versus unentitled how do all of those pieces fit? What about service areas? What about the contracts to serve forward areas that might be in another area that's already annexed? What about the annex? There are all of those questions that we've been working with the general manager at MCWD very cooperatively, and I think we should bring the board a whole description on that, because that's a whole separate issue than the funding.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, we'll deem that received. And the next item is East Side Parkway Environmental Review Update and Public Engagement Process. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair Rubio and members of the board. We're just queuing up the presentation at the moment, but just wanted to give everyone an update on the East Side Parkway environmental review and public engagement process. That I just wanted to get in front of the board before we actually start that process. So I'll give you a brief presentation here and then be available for any questions. So in the presentation, I'd like to cover where the East Side Parkway comes from, how it's a mitigation, the base reuse plan from 1997, the capital improvement program and how that fits in with the base reuse plan, 3 transportation studies, which included East Side Road, which later was named East Side Parkway, and then the schedule that we have ahead of us. So looking at the base that we all inherited as a community, originally the base had its own network. So it had a grid that served this. It served to house and feed and to train the soldiers. And it was not necessarily, it was not a way for the community to get across from one side to the other. And this better illustrates that with a map showing the routes definitely going around the base and not through the base. And this is circa 1991. And so going from the peninsula to the Salinas Valley, there was only 2 main routes around the base that you could take. So you would go Highway 1 north, and take Reservation Road into Blanco Road into Salinas. That's the northern route. The other route from the peninsula to Salinas Valley would be taking the Highway 68, Monterey Salinas Highway. So the base was largely inaccessible to the public, other than if you went through a gate. So that was not obviously a circulation route, but it was way in and out of the base. So the base reuse plan came along, and the community planned for development on former Fort Ord. And part of that plan was to integrate the roadway system, the transportation network, on the base with the rest of the surrounding community. So Eastside Parkway was part of that on-site network, and the difference between the terms here, on-site, off-site, and regional, is an on-site facility is within the boundaries of former Fort Ord. An off-site facility is what it means off the facility of former Fort Ord, but it doesn't come up to the level of a regional roadway, which is part of Caltrans. So an example of an off-site would be Davis Road, which is outside of the base, but heading towards Salinas. An on-site road, Imgen Parkway is an example of an on-site road that's been built. And regional road, Highway 156 is an example of a regional road. So part of the base reuse plan mitigation was that FORA would fund its fair share of those on-site, off-site, and regional roadways and transit. And that would be part of our capital improvement program. So part of the base reuse plan said that FORA will adopt annual capital improvement programs, and also FORA will take that to the board, and the board will look at the list of capital improvements and program them. So we only have so many dollars we collect each year. We have to prioritize which facility we're going to spend money on in a particular year or a series of years. And so Eastside Parkway was not to the top of the list until around 2009. At the time it was called Eastside Road, and the board prioritized that for funding priority above other projects. And then in 2010, county staff recommended a name change from Eastside Road to Eastside Parkway. And then subsequent to that, every CIP the board has approved has maintained that priority funding for Eastside Parkway. So I just want to cover the 3 transportation studies that we've done on former Fort Ord. So the first one here is the 1997 Fort Ord Transportation Study, and it identified Eastside Road as an on-site transportation facility, a 2-lane arterial, and it was described as being from Giggling Road to Imgen Road. And it modeled that facility to accommodate 12,100 average daily trips and established FORA's fair share at 72% of the total construction cost. And this is a map depiction of that network from 1997. We coordinated this effort with TAMC, so TAMC prepared the study in coordination with FORA, and it modeled a population on Fort Ord of 37,000, and that's consistent with the resource-constrained base use plan, which limits new housing to 6,160 new housing units. So in 2005, FORA, as is required to do in the base reuse plan, checked in with TAMC, prepared a new study to look at the transportation and what's changed in approximately 10 years and how we might look at the network and make some plans. So we had a dialogue with CSUMB. They were concerned about that original alignment of Eastside Road between Giggling Road and Imgen Road. They said to FORA that there was a concern that would impact the traffic, the flow of vehicles in their campus, because it cut right between the East Campus housing and their main campus. So from that discussion, the road was an alternative alignment for a new plan line for Eastside Road was made, and that was included as Appendix C to this transportation study, the reallocation study. And so at this time, the Eastside Road was modeled to accommodate 12,475 average daily trips, and the study established FORA's share at 100% of the total construction cost, along with each of the other on-site facilities. And that was due to a policy decision, and that decision took 100% of that on-site transportation network, made it FORA's responsibility, and slightly lessens FORA's responsibility on the regional roads. And this is a map depiction of that study. So you'll see the alignment for East Side Road, and now the description is from Eucalyptus Road connecting to Schoonover Road, or that's also Inner Garrison where Schoonover comes in. So that's the gray line on this map. And just to reiterate, it was a TAMC study that FORA coordinated with, and some of the planning changes included South Boundary Road came onto the network, Highway 68 bypass was removed from the network, and in its place, the study described that General Jim Moore Boulevard and East Side Road would take on the traffic that Highway 68 bypass had before. So now it brings us to present time of 2017 for fee reallocation study, and so this is approximately 12 years later from the previous study. Eastside Parkway was modeled to accommodate 18,586 average daily trips. It established FORA's fair share at 100% of the total construction costs. The board did the policy action of maintaining a fund local first priority. And the rough changes here between the network included adding Domani Boulevard extension, so it's taking 2nd Avenue where it currently ends its improvements at Imjin Parkway and taking it north into Marina. And then also included a broadening of the definition of Highway 1 to allow for transit and interchange improvements in addition to highway widening. And so I just wanted to come to the board today, inform you on our schedule. So we're planning for December 6th to have a community workshop on project goals and objectives for Eastside Parkway. And this is taking in feedback from the FORA committee. So we gave a presentation to the FORA committee back in September, and they asked us to do additional public outreach on goals and objectives before coming to the board for a presentation on the goals and objectives. So we're planning that for December 6th to have 2 times during that day for the public to come and give us their comments. So it'd be from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. in this building, and then also from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. on that day. And so that will help us to develop the project description and the statement of the project's objectives, which will be needed in the CEQA process. And so once we take in all that public comment, we want to summarize that and give it to the board, present to the board. We're targeting January 12th, 2018 as that board meeting to come and present those project goals and objectives and take that for board consideration. And then the other major milestones in the schedule here will be in March 2018 to distribute a notice of preparation for 30-day review period. And then in that review period, have a scoping meeting in April 2018. And that's a public meeting for the scoping meeting. And then in December 2018 to distribute the draft EIR, public review draft, and have a 45-day review period. Also in December of 2018, during that review period, to have a public meeting to assist with comments. And then in July 2019, we're projecting that a final project approval and EIR certification would return to the board for their consideration. So if you have any questions, I am available, and thank you.
Any questions for staff? Mr. Hoff.
So, couple of questions. If I understood correctly, it seems like the capacity of the proposed road has been increased by 50% from approximately 12,000 average daily trips to 18,000. Am I understanding that correctly? If so, how was that capacity determination made? Has there been a recent traffic survey made along Inner Garrison? And would that increased capacity result in more lanes, larger size? If you could speak to that, thank you.
Yes. So the number of trips we know today, since Eastside Parkway is not a facility that's been constructed, we have to use a model to determine how many trips it might serve in the future, it might accommodate. So back in 1997, with that study, that was the modeled number of trips that would go through using AMBEG's model. And that's what we use in Monterey County. We use the AMBEG regional model to look at traffic. And so they update it periodically. I believe it's every 10 years. And so we used the most recent model in 2005, and then there's also the model was updated, so we used the updated model in 2017. So that model looks at land uses, looks at job generation, and makes assumptions about how many trips would use a facility on a given day and how they would prefer one route versus another, looking at the speed limits and the capacity on the roadways. So as a result of that model, they look at how much congestion would happen given a certain number of preferences. So at 18,000 trips, it was still within a margin of error of the level of service. So FORA has a level of service D as being an acceptable level of service. And it was at the borderline of the margin of D and E.
But so would that affect the, I guess, the proposed size for the road?
You could alleviate, so since it was within the margin of error of acceptable capacity, we would not have to design it wider. But if you wanted to, say, have it run at a capacity, a lower level of C or lower level, you would provide more capacity widening of the road to 4 lanes instead of 2 lanes, as an example.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you. Any questions from the public? Okay. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Remaining members of the Board of Directors, Molly Erickson with Stamp Erickson on behalf of Keep Fort Ord Wild. Have you read the recent court filings that Keep Fort Ord Wild filed on Monday in this case? No, I'm seeing blank looks, so I'm taking that as a no. I urge you to read those filings. The proposed action does not comply with CEQA or the court order against FORA. That is Keep Fort Ord Wild's position. I urge you to read them before you act on or even consent to what's being proposed. We did not get any notice of today's meeting. We've been in litigation with FORA for years on the Eastside Parkway project. We got no meaningful notice. It's buried in the agenda. It's a little... We do not understand why FORA does not try to give meaningful notice, why FORA tries to hide things, why FORA acts like it does not want the public to actually come and actually provide public comment. If you really want good feedback on this Eastside Parkway project, rather than re-endorsing the same discredited alignment that we saw twice up here today in a very selective and revisionist history, which omitted the court order and omitted the legal background and the legal issues, we suggest that you do, just to start, do a press release announcing that FORA is going to look at a new project description for the Eastside Parkway, and public comment is encouraged. Put that information in a very large place, put it on your website, put it in all capital letters. If you're going to have if FORA is going to have a real discussion of the best project alignment for Eastside Parkway, that is what this board and FORA needs to do. Not re-endorse a discredited alignment that no board has ever considered and endorsed, but for the memorandum of approval that the court ordered you to rescind. Now, many of you are new. Many of you weren't here back in, 2011 when that MOA was approved. So you may not realize that no board has ever considered any alternative alignments. No board. It was all done behind closed doors in meetings, much of it with the various public agencies involved, and Brian Boudreau of Monterey Downs, who had a very active role in deciding where the alignment would go. That's the alignment you see here today. That's the Monterey Downs infected alignment. You all have never considered where the best location is. Where would best avoid the oak woodlands that you're trying to protect? Where would best provide the roadway? Where should the roadway even go there? Should it go somewhere else? How do we protect the habitat? How do we accommodate alternative fuel vehicles? How do we do so many things that this board has never looked at? Instead, this board has repeatedly simply re-endorsed the same discredited alignment that no board has ever approved. That's not been disclosed to you. We urge you to ask strong questions and read what Keep Fort Ord Wild has filed. Thanks very much.
thank you. Any other public comment?
My name is Eric Peterson. This pretty much reflects traffic thinking 50 years ago. which was a long time ago. I was riding bicycles a lot there because I couldn't drive. We really need to move into the 21st century with a more modern approach, not the single occupancy vehicle approach. We've got things like the Salinas Marina multimodal corridor that's 21st century technology. We really need to follow that kind of thinking as opposed to obsolete thinking. Thank you.
Is there any more public comment? I'll bring it back. We are receiving this report, and it's actually talking about public engagement.
So I just have a question.
Sure.
So if we're receiving the report with the alignment in the slides and hearing this, are we somehow endorsing this alignment?
No, this is just a confirmation that the process will begin to, in the environmental review process, all the questions that Ms. Erickson has raised, everyone's going to have an opportunity to raise them, get them answered. As far as the lawsuit that's pending, we're waiting for an order which will discharge the writ. The court should do that in the short term. There have been some questions that have been raised by KFOW counsel in that proceeding. If the court wants to advise us going forward, it certainly can. We expect the court, though, to discharge the writ and move forward with the environmental review process, which we have been trying to get underway for many, many years.
So I would like to make a motion that we receive an update on the establishment of the public engagement process.
I'll second that.
Wait a minute. This is not an action item.
There's no action item on the agenda.
So you're just, okay, well,
Yeah, yeah. We're not taking any action. We can give direction, but not a motion.
So the direction to staff is to establish the public engagement process.
I think that was the presentation.
Right, with no alignments, no preferential alignments.
No, that's
broad scope.
Right.
So that's
During all these meetings, there will be alternatives discussed. We have to get the process underway, and that's what this item is about.
So the question then in these public engagement meetings, when you're getting it underway and all of you just said they're going to be alternatives. The question that I have is, are we stepping back far enough in this process that the public might be suggesting alternatives or suggesting resolutions to meet the CEQA requirements that we're required to mitigate?
The public will have every opportunity to suggest alternatives during this process.
And so the public, what I'm trying to make sure is then that the public's input will be given equal value to any of the work that's been established or done through FORA staff, the county, whoever did this work, that we're starting back, that each and every option is equally evaluated and considered.
I'm sure each board member will keep that in mind.
Okay. Thank you for your help.
Sure.
Any other questions? Mr. Hopper? Sure. Comment.
So I guess my comment as one board member would be that during this public process, I agree with Board Member Morton that I hope that the project is presented to the public in an open-ended way and not in a way that would lead people to think this is sort of the preferred alignment or anything like that. So.
Of course. It is almost offensive that people assume that we're going to do something different than what the court asked us to do. So let it be clear. The process is at its beginning. It's not at the end.
So just to, because that response is, I'm sorry, that response was made to me, and I'm trying to clarify that for the public in this public meeting.
Ms. Garfield.
Okay, I just wanted to, this is something that I've talked to Sherry about when you put up a slide that has any information on it, anybody who sees that information kind of imprints on it. It's a sort of a human nature thing. Even if you say to them, this is not the real data, this is fake data, so we can just show you something, what it would look like, people imprint. It's a natural thing, and we've seen some difficulties that have come from that. So I'm going to make a suggestion that we somehow, when representing this, graphically represent a blur, a range, a series of question marks, a something or other, so that there's really
I think that's a great suggestion. That's a great suggestion. That'll help, I think, everybody in the process.
We'll put a unicorn.
Thank you for your help.
Ms. Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say that as a member of the County Fort Ord Committee, what we asked for was a way to get the public engaged on the question of goals and objectives, because what we see is a real mix of what people think this road is for. Some people talk about it as a way of getting between the peninsula and Salinas, and some people talk about it as a way of moving traffic within Fort Ord as development occurs. And I think that's a place to start. What are we really trying to achieve? Because that will affect a lot of things about where it's put, how wide it is. We need to know what we're trying to do. And that's been talk about a blur, that's been very fuzzy, so that people just attach whatever meaning they want to it. And so that's one of the areas that we were asking for some public conversation about, so that we could see if there's any clarity that could be realized by stepping back and discussing what are the goals and objectives of this road.
Okay. So we can deem this received? Okay, great. All right. Let's move on to the public comment period. Is there public comment? Seeing none. Items from members. Yes, sir.
So I would like to, on behalf of the City of Monterey, thank Supervisor Parker for her work in trying to find a location for, I guess, long-term vehicle living that works for people. And I wish the rest of our supervisors were here. I would really encourage them to also look for spaces in their districts, so that not one district is having to do all of that work. So.
Very good. Okay, so is there any other items for members? From members? Oh, that was mine. It's all right. Okay, everybody, happy Thanksgiving.
One more.
And
I could do one.
don't lose any sleep over this.
We still have several days to go in No Straw in November. So this is a chance to learn a new habit, to say, I'd like my whatever, no straw, please, and just change our use of plastic straws. So that's for the month of November. December, but no.
It'll be a strawless month.
We made
so
it
remember,
5
no
o'clock.
sucking.